Welcome to a very rainy Dubai, something that we're used to in Africa, but not here in the UAE.
Happy to see you.
Fantastic. In April this year, it would have been 30 years since the Rwanda genocide. It's an important time to remember. You've built the country back in a very strong and formidable way, but it is important to remember the atrocities that are unconscionable. A tragedy that shouldn't have occurred. The world watched on over that period, and many would say the international community turned its back on Rwanda and didn't intervene. It's a pertinent conversation to have right now, given what we're seeing in this very region, where there are questions about international law being broken and the way that it is applied in Gaza. Do you believe that the international community has not taken heed of the lessons of Rwanda and that we are making the same mistakes again as humanity?
Well, happy to see you, Eleni, and happy to be back here in Dubai for this summit. It's always good to be here. There are many ideas that one learns from and contributes to as well. So to the question, lessons learned is always talked about, but I don't see many in the world learning lessons. We should be learning from history, from many things that have happened, from a lot of events. In the case of Rwanda, what you've just said happened. We had a tragedy of the century, more or less, and there wasn't much in terms of mobilization for what was happening to be stopped. It had not been prevented, but at least we were left with an opportunity to learn from it. We have learned ourselves. The world needed to learn. But when you see so many things happening in the world, you question whether lessons were learned. And it's not just in Gaza, or it's in many parts of the world. There are so many conflicts, there are things happening that with the resources in the world and with the power in hands of some people, these things should not be happening. It means the power, the influence, the kinds of things some big countries have in their hands are not being put to good use, and that's why we see conflicts, instability, and loss of life to this extent that we see every day.
So is it fair to say then, Mr. President, that the international community just is failing because it doesn't have the mechanisms, the resources? I mean, we saw the interim ruling from the International Court of Justice. There's been so much happening at the UN Security Council, frankly, on various issues, and you spoke about other conflicts and other atrocities that are happening even on the continent, by the way, in Africa. How would you define what should be done? Because you've always been someone that spoke about prevention as opposed to be reactionary to what we're seeing on the conflict front.
Very true. Countries, nations, regions, international institutions should be there, in fact should have been there to ensure that there is a capacity to actually prevent these things that consume people's lives and like lives are worthless, to prevent that or to quickly stop that wherever it is taking place. But we don't see that happening. So there is a big question mark, therefore, to those in whose hands there is so much power that they have all kinds of resources to use for that to happen, and yet it doesn't happen. So we need to go back to the basics. There must be things that people know, whether it is equality, whether it is fight against division, and preventing people using divisive politics to, which underlies in most cases these tragic happenings across the world.
So as the people of Rwanda remember 30 years ago, where almost 1 million people died, were killed, what do you call on the international community to do right now?
Well, I don't know what is new that I would call the world to do that we didn't call the world to do in the past or that time it was happening. But that is a very significant signal that the world is not learning much from what is happening or what has happened in the past to be able to prevent such a situation from occurring. So what is it there that I can tell the world that has, that can influence the world to operate differently? I don't know. But for those of us who have experienced these situations and circumstances, we've learned our lessons. In fact, one lesson learned is that for countries, that's why I said countries need to build their own capacities. There are also going to be times when you are on your own. And even for things that should attract support or, synergies across, because there is no one country that has everything, when you need such, it will not happen. It won't be coming. So.
And you'll be on your own.
You'll be on your own.
It's a very, very important point. Speaking of being on your own, Africa only now has a permanent seat on the G20, and that's through the AU. Antonio Guterres, the UN chief, is calling for a permanent seat for Africa at the UN Security Council. For far too long, frankly, Mr. President, Africa has not been included in influencing global decisions. Do you think that these two seats, these two changes, hopefully at the UN Security Council as well, but at the G20, is going to change that?
Well, those two seats are long overdue. One would ask, why did it not happen 10, 20 years ago, or even more? Why is it even being talked about now? And in reality, with the G20, it's beginning to happen. But here I want to say this. There are two problems. One is we, Africa itself, we need to organize, to be together, to have a voice, a strong voice, because there are many resources on our continent. Why don't we leverage that so that the rest of the world also is interested in working with us in a cooperative way, rather than just telling people to follow what they have decided. So that is one part. The other part is what I alluded to earlier, the power that is wielded by a number of countries in this world should also be used rationally and reasonably, and get to understand that Africa, for example, is as important as they are, so that, and they are not there to just be, Africa is not there to be influenced, or to take sides according to the lines they have decided or determined. So those two things must be addressed. How rational the powerful parts of the world are and how they use their power. The second is for Africa to understand and to know that it's actually powerful in many ways.
Absolutely.
Because Africa has enormous resources.
It's got everything.
Yes, human and other resources.
Absolutely true. I mean, you're talking about the power that is wielded by, certain countries that clearly make the big decisions. There's a lot of talk and I guess concern, sort of people are saying that there could be a shift in the power axis globally, whether it's the BRICS nations, also inviting Middle Eastern countries to the fray, for example, and other emerging market countries. Do you see that shift happening? Do you believe that we could see that?
I think it is happening. It's bound to happen. Things of that nature we have witnessed in the last 5, 10, 20 years cannot continue unchallenged. There's no question about it.
Yeah. So when you spoke about Africa coming together, I mean, we've got the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a piece of policy that is working together to get countries to work together. But at the same time, the continent needs stability. We have seen many coups, specifically in West Africa, over the past few years. How concerned are you? Because we've got 19 presidential and democratic, general elections this year in Africa. It's pivotal, but at the same time, it coincides with coups.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to learning lessons. I'm sure people in those countries or places where coup d'etats are taking place, we have also to look at the root cause of that. It is easy to condemn coups and say it shouldn't happen. It is right. But at the same time, we need to ask ourselves the question. We understand it that way, yet the coups actually keep taking place. So that means there's something lacking. And therefore, that's what takes us to the root causes. In most cases, it comes down to two things. One is, people talk about leadership and so on and so forth. Leadership needs to be looked at in a sense of the weight carried by those in leadership to make sure that they serve the interests of their own people and for their prosperity. In most cases, that doesn't happen in some places. The other is about governance. You have leaders, you have how they use that responsibility to govern the entities that they are leaders for. So that's, when you see coups happening, you quickly go to that place. It's not just the military taking over, power that is for the civilian entities. It's about why does it happen?
Yeah.
So two things, leadership lacks, governance is lacking, and there is an implosion, whichever country that happens.
Africa has never, and I think it's important to say this, has never had full control of its own value chains. It has never had full control of its natural resources. It exports raw. At some point, it loses the most lucrative part of the value chain. And so many other countries benefit because they've been able to industrialize based on the commodities that Africa exports. Africa's hoping to industrialize further,
yes,
aggressively so. Do you believe the countries that are watching on and seeing Africa really starting to take control and increase its voice want to see Africa industrialize to the point where they lose their own industrial capacity, because that industrial capacity will move to Africa?
Africa must industrialize, whether there are people who wish them to be able to do so or not. The quest of Africa to industrialize should not depend on anybody's decision, but Africa's decision. It is long overdue, and we must industrialize because, again, what sense does it make that we produce? We have a lot in terms of raw materials, all the wealth, and in fact, there is a contradiction. Africa has everything, it's very wealthy. On the other hand, it is also very poor. So what is the explanation? It is not justified. So Africa must come together, must invest in their resources, must invest in value addition, must get involved with manufacturing, and understand there is a sense of urgency as well for this to happen.
Are you concerned about external influence on the continent right now? I think, you know, when you speak, it depends on who you speak to. You know, the US wants to exert its influence. Europe, Russia, for example, that's definitely been in the news. Who is influencing the continent? Because China, for example, also wants a foothold and has a big foothold on the continent. Are you worried about external influence and what that means?
Well, I think it's a concern, but I'm not worried because we are responsible for doing certain things for that not to happen. So, but that is happening. So that is another responsibility of the Africans to make sure that Africa is not there for anybody's taking. It's as if we are there just for anyone to come and pick and do whatever they want with us. So this is a responsibility we carry. This is something that is urgent to make sure that we are not there to be influenced to take a certain line or the other line because somebody has decided so and because somebody is powerful. So Africa must be that powerful to make sure that we do what has been determined by ourselves to be important to us and our people. What doesn't Africa have to be able to decide
Absolutely.
to do that?
Mr. President, one quick question. You've got presidential elections later on this year. President Biden last week said, or a few days ago said, I'm the most qualified man for the job and I need to see this through. I need to finish what I started. Elections in Rwanda this year, do you believe that you're the most qualified for the job and to see it through?
Yeah, the elections are for people to decide whether the people they are electing are qualified to do the job. So we'll see.
The voting counts. That's
counts, and history counts, and the proof is in the pudding.
Sir, I thank you very much for your time and can't wait to visit Rwanda again. I appreciate it. Good to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency the President, Paul Kagame.